Hello, and welcome back to Culturopolis, the show where I give my thoughts on the latest pieces of media releasing this month in culture. In the month of November and this penultimate episode of the year, I will be looking at some long-anticipated releases like the return of Doctor Who, world-renowned directors' newest films such as Ridley Scott's Napoleon, and some wonderful surprises like Saltburn and Bottoms. Then, finally, we'll be embarking on some delightful holiday films for this month's retro and recommendations by taking another look at the Muppets Christmas Carol and the Christmas Chronicles. So, without further ado, this is Culturopolis. The first film we're going to talk about is Dream Scenario. This is the new Nick Cage movie which puts the iconic actor in the role of an average nobody, a college professor who suddenly almost everyone in the world begins to dream about. The dreams are almost inconsequential and Cage's character, Paul, does nothing in them, but the effect they have on the real world and Paul's own life prove to be more of a curse than a gift. I remember seeing the trailer for this movie and I couldn't wait. If the idea of Nick Cage appearing in everyone's dreams doesn't grab your attention, I don't know what will. However, the execution of this wonderful idea just left me scratching my head at some of the decisions made. I thought Nick Cage and the entire cast were all really great. I thought Julianne Nicholson was absolutely wonderful in the scenes where she played against Cage, and their relationship within the movie was wonderful to watch. The story itself is very interesting, and I'm glad the filmmakers clearly had a lot of fun recreating different types of dreams for those sections of the movie, where we see the perspectives of characters when they are dreaming. It captures the uncanny vibe of a dream very well, much like famous dream sections in shows like The Sopranos, and I loved the music from Owen Pallett that complemented these scenes quite nicely with an uneasy, undefinable atmosphere. The most memorable moments are when Nick Cage gets to really go all out with this performance that you almost hate to watch because of how awkward and comedic it is at the same time. However, the problem that I had with Dream Scenario after a while is that it feels like the film doesn't know where to go, and the script loses its footing on multiple occasions. This is most evident in the final act of the movie, where scenes are edited together very sloppily, but it's prevalent throughout. Perhaps the biggest example of this is the scene where Paul visits Molly, played by Dylan Glula. It just felt very unnecessary, and it didn't really fit in with the rest of the story. For just being over 100 minutes long, I think there is a lot of fat within the story that could have been trimmed off. It's a shame after such an ingenious elevator pitch is delivered in the beginning, but the filmmakers really lost the mark when it came to fleshing out a proper story with this idea. I feel like the premise would have been suited more to a 40-minute or hour-long Tales of the Unexpected or Twilight Zone episode, because the final product we got was such a waste of a brilliant idea and cast. The next one we're going to be talking about is Bottoms. This high school comedy is all about PJ and Josie, two young lesbian friends who are desperate to get with their crushes. In a wild array of awkward lies and misunderstandings, the pair find themselves in charge of a women's self-defense/fight club. Hoping this will get them closer to their crushes and potentially more popular in school, they run the club with the help of their friend Hazel and their eccentric teacher, Mr. G. Bottoms was incredibly funny. I found myself laughing out loud more than I wasn't whilst watching it. This almost brought me back to the Cornetto trilogy in its direction at which the story moved and how consistent character traits were that will make rewatches even more brilliant, because you realise these seeds being planted at the very beginning of the film that only come about near the end, which I always find fantastic to realise. I think the cast really hold this all together though. Many will know one of the leads, Io Edebiri, for her work on the show The Bear. She is just as charming in this film, as well as her co-star Rachel Sonnett, whose work I'm not quite as familiar with, but I still found her extremely funny. And the pair worked really well together. All the scenes where they are bouncing off jokes and emotional moments work perfectly. I also have to praise the movie for its realistic portrayal of a modern LGBT+ relationship. Two lesbian characters do not have to like each other the same way two heterosexual characters of different sexes don't have to be romantically engaged with one another. It's refreshing for a Hollywood production to recognise that and have it at the forefront of its story. That same story is absolutely absurd and incredibly cheesy in the best possible way. The level of absurdity just builds and builds and builds until the climax where literally all hell breaks loose and all reason is thrown out the window, and it was just amazing to watch. I loved all the characters, even the antagonist Jeff, who for the movie full of lesbians acts the most camp. He and all the football players were all very funny in their ridiculous tyrannical rule over the school, especially considering a lot of the cast are pretty unknown names and prove to show a lot of skill. Bottoms is the perfect movie for the younger crowd, especially like teenagers. Friends and I went to see it together and couldn't stop laughing. It was such a wonderful experience. Looking at the box office results, it looks like Bottoms only just made back its production budget, and most of that came from the US, which is a shame, but I do think this will be a comedy that becomes a cult hit and is going to be remembered for years, so I am happy that at least I got to experience it upon release. Next is the final Marvel movie of the year, fittingly called The Marvels, when a Kree leader uses her magical bangle to restore her home by taking resources from other planets. It has the adverse effect of connecting the three heroes who all control the same light energy. Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, and Monica Rambeau all of a sudden swap places whenever any of them use their powers at the same time. They eventually converge on each other and must work together to stop the Kree before they destroy Earth and other planets. As I'm sure many are aware, the MCU has seen a sharp decline in quality in recent years. I would love to say that The Marvels is a shining example, a change of pace, an exciting story that breaks the superhero mold, but unfortunately, it just isn't. This might be the first Marvel movie to require so much to watch since Endgame. Since this is a sequel to the original Captain Marvel from over 4 years ago, whilst also featuring the character Monica Rambeau, who we meet in Captain Marvel but don't actually know or see their origin until WandaVision, which you can only understand if you watch Avengers Age of Ultron, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. But for those, you also have to have watched the first two Captain America movies and the first Avengers movie, which you can only have watched after seeing Iron Man Hulk. You also have to watch the other Disney Plus show Miss Marvel, which references the first Captain Marvel movie, but by this point you've already forgotten what happens in that one. But the Marvels also references characters from Thor Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder, so you'll have to watch those ones. But you also have to know about Nick Fury and how he got in the satellite, and you'd have to watch Spider-Man Far From Home for the end credit scene for that, plus also Spider-Man Homecoming to understand the second movie, but that also requires Civil War, and you'd also have to watch Secret Invasion to properly understand the Skrulls which are featured in this movie. But then the villains, the Kree, you have to watch the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie to understand what they're all about, and then you would also have to watch the next two Guardians of the Galaxy movies as well as the holiday special. All of this builds on Chris Evans' Human Torch opening the multiverse to the wider Ben 10 timeline. This then of course leads into Kylo Ren's solo movie featuring the return of Hugh Jackman as the Greatest Showman, but that's a whole other issue that the MCU is facing. Let's talk about the Marvels. If I had to describe the whole thing in one word, it would just be underwhelming. Most characters, plot points, action, music and direction just feel very formulaic and been there, done that. This is as stereotypical an MCU movie as it gets. It's perhaps the first Marvel movie that's so blatantly a family film. Of course, pretty much all of the Marvel IP is suitable for families, but this felt the safest and designed most to appeal to kids in a similar fashion to nonsensical adventures like Spy Kids. This most definitely supported by the action, which for the most part is extremely forgettable. Maybe one scene properly plays around with the teleporting mechanic that they introduce, but it's otherwise pretty bland overall. The CG and VFX overall, whilst perhaps not as bad as Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, could be quite distracting sometimes. I think it has reached a point now where nothing surprises you with the visuals of these movies. Even if at times they might throw in a really good looking shot or some great cinematography is there for a split second, it all gets mixed into this one cocktail of crunched VFX workers and undercooked CG. Where the film does earn some props is in the character dynamics, how these different characters interact with one another, whether it's Kamala fangirling over Carol or Carol learning to be an aunt for her long since seen niece. These few character moments we have can be quite touching. I did also like having Kamala's family strung along for this entire world-ending superhero movie, but that enjoyment does require previous MCU knowledge from two different shows and a movie that is also attempting to be an entire sequel for. Of the three Marvels, Kamala is definitely my favourite, and Iman Vellani is maybe the best actor in the MCU at the moment. If you've yet to watch Miss Marvel, I definitely recommend it. Despite some flaws that it shares with the other MCU Disney Plus shows, it is a lot of fun. But the Marvels just didn't quite make the cut for me. It's not a case of being worse than any one of its predecessors in the MCU, it's more just about refusing to be different from them. Marvel desperately needs a change in their process of releases. I hope this semi-break that they take in 2024 with only one release being Deadpool 3, will give them the time to figure out a plan and ensure that the content they start pushing is the best quality rather than the most quantity. This one I'm excited to talk about because we're going to be talking about Saltburn. Oliver starts his student life at Oxford as a bit of a loner before bumping into the most popular person in the university, Felix. They grow a friendship, and once summer rolls around, Felix invites Oliver to spend it at the family's estate. Oliver goes on to meet the rest of Felix's family and take on a life he never thought possible for himself. I had high expectations for Saltburn. The trailer left me with such anticipation that I just couldn't wait to watch it. I never like to trust trailers about how good a film will eventually be, of course with different teams working on the marketing and the final product itself, but the editing, style, and ideas expressed just in those 2 minutes of the first trailer left me with a lot of hype. And I have to say, Saltburn absolutely blew me away. Barry Keoghan and Jacob Elordi, the two stars of the film, are incredible. Keoghan is a brilliant actor, and his career just keeps on hitting new heights with every performance that I see of his. So to have him fully star in this film and give it quite literally everything he has was just a joy to watch. Jacob Elordi was a big surprise for me since I haven't watched much of his work except for the marketing for some of those Netflix rom-coms like Kissing Booth. But I can say he was really, really good in this movie, and it only made me more excited to see him take on Elvis Presley a few months from now in Priscilla. The rest of the cast were all great: Rosamund Pike, Alison Oliver, and Archie Madekwe, who starred in Gran Turismo, but my favourite had to be Richard E. Grant, who was very much himself, I thought. His tone of voice and facial expressions were just perfect for this role as the father of the Catton family. Writer and director Emerald Fennell, who is also most well known for Promising Young Woman, did a stellar job with this. Both films are quite similar in tone, but personally I preferred Saltburn a bit more, mostly because of the way Fennell plays with these different characters that all share the same trait of trying to appeal to and at the same time steal from everybody else. Saltburn was just so beautifully shot, I thought. The visuals throughout are gorgeous, and Emerald Fennell does this wonderful thing with the use of 4:3. She's able to envelop so much in the frame at one time. Each shot is beautifully organised and can make things feel very intimate but at the same time very solitary. So yeah, Saltburn is the best movie of this month by far. I loved it. I believe it will shortly be coming to streaming, so if it's not in cinemas by the time this comes out, you'll have to wait till then. But this is one to really be sucked into for the story, the characters, the visuals, and the absolute madness that unearths itself throughout. Now it's time to talk Napoleon. This is the biographical action movie that depicts most of the life of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, leader of the French during the Revolutionary Wars. This tells the story of how he rose to power after the French Revolution, found love with Josephine, played by Vanessa Kirby, conquered nearly all of Europe, and ultimately saw defeat in the Battle of Waterloo. This is another film that I was really looking forward to, perhaps even more than Saltburn due to the leading actors Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby. However, I left a bit muddled with a lot of questions and complaints. It's unfortunate when you have such an incredible director, cast and crew creating something remarkable visually. However, the script just cannot be saved. Napoleon suffered greatly from its writing in my opinion, and that's for a few reasons. One thing, the film simply tries to do too much. Even at almost 3 hours long, there is just too much going on in this story, because at times it fails to tell a story. It's just going through almost Napoleon's entire life. I would rather they chose to focus on one moment or a singular decade in his life perhaps, rather than cramming in his entire military career, his love life, as well as the rise and fall of him being the emperor just into one film, because it's just a mess. What saves the movie are the performances and direction. Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby are just absolutely incredible in this film together, and they worked brilliantly as Napoleon and Josephine. The big takeaway I had was their complicated relationship, and this interpretation of it is very impactful. Though I thought Vanessa Kirby should have been in it more, because as she is in everything she does, she stole the show for this movie. But Joaquin Phoenix, of course, is also brilliant, and his version of Napoleon that he portrays was certainly not what I was expecting, but it still worked for me and fit with my own version of history. Then the direction from Ridley Scott was fantastic, most of all for the action scenes, which are brutal. There's violence and blood and horrific battles taking place, but at the same time, you see Napoleon's role shifting in each one, though always at the centre. The film never did portray to me personally how much of a strategist Napoleon was through each of the battles he led, but again I think that's more at the fault of the script than the way Ridley Scott shot those events. I would argue that Napoleon is not worth a watch. It's a shame, but it's a big disappointment for me, and I think if you really are interested in the life of Bonaparte, then you would be better off watching a documentary on YouTube. Now it's time for a horror movie, one specifically for US viewers, but I still watched it, and that is Thanksgiving. This slasher follows a murderous pilgrim that comes after all those involved in the last year's Black Friday massacre. One such group of teenagers who inadvertently began the shopping/murder spree has to figure out who is committing the murders and save themselves in the process. This new horror movie is helmed by Eli Roth, the same person who made Hostel and the upcoming Borderlands movie, which I'm very cautiously optimistic about, but Thanksgiving was a decent watch, if not quite predictable for a film relying on its twists. I could see a lot of inspiration from the original Scream movie, but without the fun of the satire that's embedded throughout, and instead more having fun using Thanksgiving traditions to make some good kills. Those kills were pretty good, and I always love a slasher villain like Ghostface, who's clumsy and falls about, yet is still a force to be reckoned with. John Carver just wasn't all that scary though. The use of social media and live streams to show off their plan and kills was just really dumb, and it didn't really help that I didn't care for any of the characters. I'm sure there would be some fun if you watched this movie with friends and made fun of it most of the way through, but otherwise I would argue Thanksgiving was just pretty boring compared to slasher movies that have come before it. Another franchise returns in this final film of November, Hunger Games: A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. A young Coriolanus Snow lives in the capital after the war that divided Panem. He trains at the academy under the man who made the Hunger Games, Casca Highbottom, and in order to win money to support his family, he must train a contender who has to win the Hunger Games. Snow becomes so invested in this tribute, Lucy Gray, that it becomes far more personal to him that she gets out alive. I was a big fan of the original Hunger Games films and could not wait to see what this prequel had in store, especially after hearing much praise for the book that it's adapting. While it's not a perfect movie, I liked what it had to say and how it further developed the backstory of the character of President Snow and the overall lore of the Hunger Games world. Tom Blythe, or Blith, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, was a very good choice to play a younger Snow. His performance and the script worked together very nicely in this arrangement that shows the progression of how this character starts as one thing and turns it completely into another. That arc ties together very nicely with his relationship with Lucy Gray Bird, played by Rachel Zegler, who at first didn't captivate me as much as I was expecting. It wasn't really until the point after the games had finished that I really began to like her character, but it was still a tremendous performance. The cast is also star-studded, including Viola Davis, Peter Dinklage, and Jason Schwartzman, all of whom are brilliant. Music is a big factor of this movie, with song even being part of the title, and I love the musical additions. Whether it's the soundtrack or songs performed by Rachel Zegler, they worked quite well and kind of directed the emotional moments of the scenes where they were at the forefront. I think as well that, like Saw X, this is a movie that understands that it's designed to work for an audience that has never seen or read The Hunger Games, which I always appreciate. There were maybe a couple nods that felt a little bit too on the nose and lingered a bit too long, but otherwise I thought it was very well done. Just one small issue I had was how some of the action was done. The opening of the games, for example, and some of the other bits look as though they're trying to do a one-shot action sequence despite there still being cuts. So what you get is just some really shaky, unnatural camera movement that doesn't seem to have a purpose other than to be shaky and unnatural. But Hunger Games: A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was still a really fun action-adventure movie, with some deep cuts that fans and newcomers to the franchise will both definitely appreciate. Moving on to television, we will be reviewing the return of the longest-running sci-fi series of all time, and that is none other than Doctor Who. After regenerating back to a more familiar face, the 14th Doctor comes back to Earth to find his best friend Donna Noble, who's at risk of dying if she ever remembers the Doctor. At the same moment, a spaceship falls to Earth, and the Doctor has to protect the Noble family, as well as the meat, which is being targeted by the ominous Roth warriors. Doctor Who is the thing that I love perhaps the most in the world. One of my earliest memories is seeing David Tennant in his pyjamas for the first ever episode as the 10th Doctor. Then, 18 years later, seeing him return to the role alongside Catherine Tate was very exciting. This new series also means the return of showrunner Russell T Davies after Chris Chibnall made some damning decisions with the show, which left ratings at an all-time low. But how does this first special, The Star Beast, hold up? I have to say this was a fantastic return to form for Doctor Who. Not only did it have returning faces in more ways than one, but the essence of the show I loved when I was younger has absolutely returned in this first special, and I couldn't be happier. David Tennant and Catherine Tate were fantastic as the Doctor and Donna, with Jacqueline King and Carl Collins, who are members of the Noble family, with smaller roles but still just as brilliant. And then we also have the newcomer, Rose Noble, played by Yasmin Finney, who I thought was a wonderful addition to this story. This episode is an adaptation of an old comic book story, also called The Star Beast, which revolves around two creatures, the Meep and the Roth. And I thought this still fit fantastically into modern Who. I loved the progression of this story, the twists and turns that it takes, and how Russell weaved this classic tale into the modern Doctor Who landscape with a much bigger budget. And with that budget, the VFX has seen a massive increase in quality, thanks to the publishing deal made with Disney. Also, the music with Murray Gold returning was amazing, with subtle cues to his previous work on the show, both during the Davies and Moffat eras, which I really liked. What I'm just so happy about though with this new special is seeing so many people excited about Doctor Who. The fact that this is creating a brand new jumping point for newcomers and hardcore fans fills me with delight, especially with a new season next year starring Ncuti Gatwa on the way. Now it's time for retro and recommendations, pieces of media from the past few decades or even years that I think deserve some love today. As we are heading right into December, it is only fitting to recommend some Christmas movies, and this month I'll be looking at The Muppets Christmas Carol and The Christmas Chronicles. The Muppets Christmas Carol turned the classic Charles Dickens novel from 1843 into a musical comedy, also starring Michael Caine. Ebenezer Scrooge is a grumpy old man who hoards all of his money and is full of misery and despair. On Christmas Eve, the anniversary of his business partner's death, Scrooge is visited by three ghosts who go through his life and teach him the joys of Christmas and kindness to others. Also, Kermit. I love this movie, but I don't have the same nostalgia for it that most people do. Actually, the first time I ever watched it was last year. I had never watched it before, I don't know why, but it's a goddamn shame because I loved this comical little version of A Christmas Carol. The music was wonderful, all the songs, lyrical or not, were all amazing. Thankful Heart genuinely goes so hard and is one of the top 5 Christmas songs of all time. I said it. Michael Caine, God bless you, because this performance as Scrooge is maybe the best version of the character I have ever seen. Everyone knows how talented an actor he is, but he brings such emotion to perfectly adapt this character and story, but at the same time he isn't so serious that it brings down the comedy. He was the perfect choice for this version of A Christmas Carol, and he remarkably outdoes the puppets that he's working alongside. Everyone knows that this movie is a classic, but I really wanted to talk about it. I love the Muppets, and I hope they do something again with them soon, maybe in the style of adapting classic novels like Christmas Carol, but with a Muppets twist. I would love that. But this is still a wonderful movie to come back to each year. And finally, we're going to be talking about something a bit more recent. Kurt Russell stars as Santa Claus himself in The Christmas Chronicles. This is a Netflix movie that follows one family in melancholy after the death of their father. The two children try to catch Santa in the act, but doing so puts all of Christmas in jeopardy. Working with Santa, the reindeer, and even the elves, brother and sister Teddy and Kate have to save Christmas. I don't really know why, but this film was just very heartwarming. Sure, it's cheesy and maybe predictable, and at the end of the day, it's just a saving Christmas movie. But it just works. It does, in fact, have a similar vibe to Doctor Who whenever that show brings in a historical figure or icon of culture. The way it points out history, making jokes about what's mythical and what's true, is always great, and it's great here with Santa Claus. Kurt Russell takes on that role and does a very good job of it, considering, well, how do you really make a character out of Santa Claus? But Russell's version of Saint Nick is just as jolly as you would expect, tying up the whole thing with a lovely musical number that also stars Silvio from The Sopranos for some reason. The two main characters, siblings Teddy and Kate, were also very likeable, and their personal journeys were very touching to watch. The jokes maybe didn't always land, but I loved all the modern day references, kind of like Hocus Pocus 2, Santa being out of touch with the modern world slightly. It's always funny. Christmas Chronicles is just a solid fun time, especially one that families will enjoy during the holiday season. It's not perfect by any means, there are plenty of plot holes and contrivances, sure, but it's a film where Santa Claus is trying to save Christmas, so I can let it slide. And that was November. Honestly, one of the best months for cinema and culture as of recent, with the return of Doctor Who and one of my favourite films now, Saltburn. I can only hope that December brings just as much goodness to our screens. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and pass it around. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will be talking about Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, Wonka, Ferrari, and much more. Thanks guys, bye bye.